A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
Hey everyone, welcome back to My Weird Prompts. I am Korn, and I am sitting here in our usual spot in Jerusalem with my brother. It is March 17th, 2026, and the air outside is finally starting to feel like spring. But we are heading into a topic that is decidedly chilly in its implications.
Herman Poppleberry, at your service. It is good to be back at the microphones today. We have a topic that feels very close to home, literally, because we are talking about something that happens just a short drive down the highway from us at Ben Gurion Airport. But it is a version of Ben Gurion that most people listening will never actually see with their own eyes.
Right. Our housemate Daniel sent us a link earlier this week to a fascinating interview with the manager of the Fattal Terminal. Now, if you have ever flown out of Ben Gurion, you know the typical experience. It is what some people call the cattle class grind. You arrive at Terminal 3. You wait in that long, winding security line for the initial questioning. Then you stand in the check-in line. Then the hand luggage screening. Then the second security check. And finally the passport control. It is a very public, very high-friction process designed for mass processing. But Daniel's prompt asked us to look at the exact opposite of that experience.
The ghost experience. That is how the industry insiders describe it. We are talking about the invisible infrastructure of VIP airport terminals. Specifically, the Fattal Terminal at Ben Gurion, which is really a masterclass in how the ultra-wealthy and the politically powerful have essentially seceded from the public experience of travel. This is not just about a shorter line, Korn. This is about a separate physical asset class within our public infrastructure.
It is interesting you use the word seceded, because when we think of an airport, we usually think of it as one of the last great levelers of modern society. Whether you are flying economy or first class, you usually have to walk through the same terminal doors, stand in the same general vicinity for security, and breathe the same recycled air in the duty-free mall. But these VIP terminals change the geometry of the airport entirely. They create a parallel world that exists right alongside the one we know, but it is completely invisible to the average traveler.
They really do. And I think we should start by defining what we are actually talking about here for the listeners who might think this is just a fancy airline lounge. This is not the King David Lounge for LL passengers or the Dan Lounge. Those are located inside the main terminal. You still have to go through the front door of the airport, deal with the crowds, and pass through the main security gates to get to them. A VIP terminal, like the Fattal Terminal at Ben Gurion, is a separate physical building. It has its own gated entrance, its own private parking, and its own dedicated security and customs apparatus. It is a bypass of the entire airport ecosystem.
So, you are essentially erasing the airport from your travel day. You are not just getting a better seat on the plane. You are getting a different version of reality, where the friction of the border simply does not exist for you.
And that is what I want to dig into today. Who is using these places? What does it actually cost in 2026? And what does it mean for the rest of us when the people who run the world no longer have to deal with the same inconveniences that we do? Let's start with the who. Because when I think of a VIP terminal, the old school image is heads of state. You think of the President of the United States or the Prime Minister of Israel. And obviously, they use these facilities for very real security reasons. But the manager in that interview made it clear that the demographic has shifted. It is much broader than just politicians now.
It has become a commercial product. It is no longer just a diplomatic necessity.
Precisely. Historically, these terminals were built for diplomatic missions and state visits. You need a place where a motorcade can pull up directly to a building without creating a massive security headache or a traffic jam in the main terminal. But today, the primary drivers of growth for places like the Fattal Terminal are high net worth individuals, tech moguls, and corporate executives. We are talking about the kinetic elite. People for whom time is not just money, but a commodity that they are willing to buy at an extreme premium.
So, we're talking about the CEOs of multinational corporations, celebrities, and what you might call the arbitrageurs of time. People who look at a 3-hour wait in Terminal 3 and see it as a massive net loss of productivity.
Right. If you are a high level executive and your time is billed at thousands of dollars an hour, spending 3 hours navigating the chaos of the summer rush is not just annoying, it is a bad business decision. But there is also the element of privacy and total erasure. For many of these users, the goal is to move from their home or office to their destination without ever being seen by the public. They want to be ghosts in the machine.
It is the privatization of the border. That is what strikes me as a philosopher. Normally, the border is the ultimate public space. It is where the state meets the individual. It is where sovereignty is exercised. But in a VIP terminal, that interaction is mediated by a private company.
Well, we have to look at the technical mechanism there, because this is where it gets really interesting for the nerds like me. Even in a private terminal like Fattal, the security and passport control are still handled by the state. You still have the Shin Bet and the border police involved. They have to be. But instead of you going to them in a crowded hall with 500 other people, they come to you. You are sitting in a private suite, maybe having a double espresso or a glass of high-end Israeli wine, and a border official comes to your room to scan your passport.
That is a huge distinction. We talked back in episode 1138 about the El Al security model and how intense that questioning can be. If you are using the VIP terminal, you are still getting vetted, but the environment is entirely different. Instead of standing behind a yellow line while a young security officer asks you who packed your bags and if anyone gave you a gift, you are in a leather armchair. The security requirements are the same on paper, but the psychological experience of security is completely inverted.
Right. In the main terminal, security is something that is done to you. It is a process of submission to the state. In the VIP terminal, security feels like a service that is being provided for you. It is bespoke. It is polite. And that brings us to the cost, which is something Daniel specifically wanted us to look at, because the price of this erasure is staggering for the average person.
Yeah, let's talk numbers. Because this is not just like paying for an extra legroom seat.
Not even close. As of March 2026, to even set foot in the Fattal Terminal, you're looking at a base price that usually starts around $500 to $600 per person just for the basic service. And that is if you are already part of a group. If you want a private room, or if you are using the full suite of services, what they call the cigar lounge experience or the private bedroom suites, the price can easily climb to $1,500 or even $2,000 per use. And remember, Korn, that does not include your flight. This is just the cost of being in the building for 2 hours and being driven to the plane.
$2,000 to avoid the airport. Think about that. For most families in Israel or the United States, that is the cost of their entire vacation. It really highlights the extreme stratification of travel. It is a world where you can pay to make the public disappear.
And it is not just a one-time fee for many of these people. A lot of corporations have what are essentially subscriptions or corporate accounts with these terminals. They see it as a necessary business expense for their top-tier leadership. But here is the technical detail that makes Fattal unique. It is one of the few in the world that is actually located within the secure perimeter of the airport, but is operated as a private-public partnership. This creates a very specific set of logistics. You have to move people from a private building to an aircraft that might be parked at a gate in the main terminal or out on a remote stand.
Right. And you are not walking down a jet bridge with everyone else.
No. A luxury vehicle, usually a high-end Mercedes or an Audi, picks you up at the door of the terminal and drives you across the tarmac directly to the stairs of the aircraft. You are the last one on and the first one off. You never see the other passengers until you are actually on the plane. And even then, if you are flying private or in a high-end first-class cabin, you might not see them at all. You are essentially bypassing the public sphere entirely.
This is where we need to start talking about the societal implications, because this is about more than just convenience. It is about the normalization of class-based segregation in our infrastructure. It reminds me of the discussion we had in episode 611 about the Jerusalem light rail. In that case, we were talking about how public transit enforcement can create friction for certain groups, specifically in how the lines are policed. But here we are seeing the opposite. We are seeing the total removal of friction for a specific elite class.
It is the gated community model applied to international travel. If you can afford it, you never have to interact with the masses. You never have to deal with the frustrations of a broken escalator, a crying baby in the food court, or a long line at the coffee shop. And while that sounds like a dream, I wonder what it does to the political will to maintain the public terminal.
That is a profound point, Herman. This is what sociologists often call the secession of the successful. If the people who have the most influence, the most wealth, and the most political capital are no longer using the public infrastructure, they have very little incentive to ensure that infrastructure is well funded or efficient. If the CEO of a major airline or a high-ranking government official never has to stand in the security line at Ben Gurion, they don't feel the visceral frustration of that experience. It becomes an abstract problem on a spreadsheet rather than a lived reality.
And that leads to a degradation of the public experience, because the people who could demand change are simply opting out. Why would an airport authority spend $50 million improving the general seating area or the air conditioning in Terminal 3 when they can lease out a small corner of the airfield to a private company like Fattal for a massive profit? The return on investment on a VIP terminal is astronomical compared to the return on investment on a better bathroom in the main terminal.
It is a market-driven incentive to prioritize the few over the many. But from a conservative or market-oriented perspective, you could also argue that this is just the market providing a service that people are clearly willing to pay for. If someone wants to spend their own money to avoid a line, why should the state stop them? Especially if that revenue helps subsidize the rest of the airport's operations.
That is the common defense, and there is some truth to it. The fees paid by private terminals do contribute to the airport's budget, but I think we have to ask if there are some things that should remain a shared experience. Is the border one of those things? Is the process of leaving and entering a country something that should be identical for every citizen regardless of their bank account? In Israel, especially, we have this ethos of being a small, tight-knit society where everyone serves in the military together and everyone stands in the same lines. But the existence of these hyper-exclusive spaces suggests that this ethos is fraying.
It definitely is. And it is not just happening here. You see this at Heathrow with the Windsor Suite, where the royal family and celebrities go. You see it at Los Angeles International with the terminal called PS, which used to be called the Private Suite. You see it in Dubai and Singapore. It is a global trend toward the fragmentation of public space. We are moving toward a world where your experience of the world is entirely dictated by your price point.
I want to go back to the psychological divide you mentioned. When you remove all friction from someone's life, it changes how they perceive the rest of the world. If every time you travel you are whisked through a private terminal with a glass of champagne, you start to view the airport as a place of total ease. You lose the ability to empathize with the mother traveling with 3 kids who has been standing in line for 2 hours because the biometric scanners are down. It creates a sort of elite bubble. And that bubble is not just physical, it is cognitive. You begin to believe that your time is inherently more valuable than everyone else's, not just in a market sense, but in a human sense.
And when that mindset takes hold in our leadership class, it has real-world consequences for policy. If you don't experience the friction of the state, you don't realize when the state is failing its citizens. It also changes the nature of the airport itself. Ben Gurion is often called the gateway to Israel. For most people, that gateway is a loud, crowded, chaotic place. It is a place of reunions and tearful goodbyes. But for the VIP, the gateway is a quiet, sterile, luxury lounge. It is a completely different introduction to the country.
Let's talk about the security theater aspect for a second. We have discussed before how much of the modern airport experience is about the appearance of security rather than the reality of it. In the VIP terminal, they can afford to be more efficient because they're dealing with a smaller volume of people. They can do background checks in advance. They can use biometric data more effectively without the bottleneck of 5,000 people trying to use one machine. In a way, the VIP terminal is a glimpse into what all travel could look like if we had the resources to treat every passenger as an individual rather than as a unit of cargo.
That is a fascinating way to look at it. Instead of seeing it as a secession, you could see it as a pilot program for a more humane way of traveling. But the problem is that we don't have the resources to scale that to millions of people. So instead, we reserve it for the top 1%. It becomes a marker of status. Using the Fattal Terminal isn't just about saving time. It is about signaling that you are the kind of person whose time is worth saving.
There is also the second-order effect on the airline industry itself. As more high-value passengers move to private terminals and private jets, the revenue model for commercial airlines changes. They become even more dependent on squeezing every possible cent out of the economy passengers. We are already seeing that in 2026 with the shrinking of seat pitch and the unbundling of every possible service. The gap between the best and the worst experience on a plane has never been wider. It used to be that first class was just a bigger seat and better food. Now it is a private suite on the plane and a private terminal on the ground. It is a different class of existence.
So, what does this look like in the future? Do you think we are going to see more of these terminals?
The demand is only growing. As global wealth becomes more concentrated, the market for extreme privacy and frictionless travel will continue to expand. I think we will eventually see these VIP terminals become the standard for any major international hub. They will be as common as car rental centers. It is a sobering thought. We are essentially building a parallel infrastructure for a parallel society, and it is all hidden in plain sight. Most people driving past Ben Gurion have no idea that the Fattal Terminal even exists, or that there are people being driven across the tarmac in luxury cars while they are waiting for their luggage at the carousel.
It is the invisible architecture of the elite, and I think that is the key takeaway here. Our society is becoming increasingly bifurcated, and it is happening in the places we least expect it. The airport, which used to be a symbol of the democratic promise of the 20th century, the idea that anyone could fly anywhere, has become a symbol of the 21st century's obsession with hierarchy and exclusion.
You mentioned earlier that this is a market response to government inefficiency. I think that is an important point to dwell on. If the public terminals were more efficient, if the security process was less of a nightmare, would there be as much demand for these VIP services? Probably not as much, but I think the desire for privacy would still be there. For a lot of these users, it is not just about the time. It is about not being part of the crowd. It is about social distance. And that is something that even the most efficient public terminal can't provide.
It is a preference for isolation over community, and when you apply that to the border, it has a very specific political flavor. It says that the rules of the state are a burden to be managed rather than a shared responsibility. That is a very conservative critique, actually. The idea that we have a shared national life that requires us to participate in the same institutions. When we allow the wealthy to opt out of those institutions, we weaken the social fabric.
We saw this in our episode on the civil defense crisis, episode 1163. When people feel that the system is rigged to protect some and not others, you lose social cohesion. It is the same principle here. If the average traveler feels that the rules of security and travel only apply to them and not to the people in the Fattal Terminal, they lose respect for those rules. They start to see the state not as a protector, but as an obstacle.
And yet, we have to recognize the reality of the world we live in. We live in a world where security threats are real, and where some people are higher value targets than others. You can't have the Prime Minister standing in the same security line as a tour group. It just isn't feasible. But the expansion of that privilege to anyone with a corporate credit card is what changes the equation. It is the commercialization of state-level security.
That is exactly what it is, and I think that is why it feels so uncomfortable to many people. It is the feeling that something that should be a public good security and border control is being sold to the highest bidder. So, let's look at some of the practical takeaways for our listeners, because most of us are not going to be using the Fattal Terminal anytime soon. What does this mean for the average traveler?
I think the first takeaway is to be aware of how your own experience is being shaped by these trends. When you see a new fee or a new tier of service, recognize that it is part of a broader move toward the fragmentation of travel. We are being trained to accept that every aspect of our lives can be optimized if we are willing to pay for it. The cost of time is the new primary currency of the 21st century.
And the second takeaway is to pay attention to the quality of our public spaces. When we see the public infrastructure being neglected, we should ask who is no longer using it. We should demand that our leaders and our influencers stay invested in the shared experience of the country. I would also add that we should look at the trade-offs between efficiency and equality. Sometimes a little bit of friction is a good thing if it means we are all in the same boat. There is a value to the shared experience of the airport, even if it is just the shared experience of being annoyed by a long line. It reminds us that we are all citizens of the same state.
It is the commonality of the human condition. We all have to wait, we all have to be checked, and we all have to get from point A to point B. When you remove that for a certain class of people, you remove a piece of their humanity too. You remove their connection to the collective.
That is a deep point, Corn, and I think it is a good place to start wrapping things up. We have looked at the demographics, the costs, and the deep societal implications of these VIP terminals. It is a fascinating, if somewhat troubling, look into the future of global transit. The airport is the last place we are all supposed to be equal, but that equality is disappearing into private suites and tinted window Mercedes transfers.
It really is. And I think it is something we will continue to see evolve, especially as technology makes it even easier to track and sort people by their economic value. Before we go, I want to remind everyone that if you are enjoying these deep dives into the weird and the overlooked, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other people find the show and helps us keep this collaboration going.
Yeah, it really does. And if you want to find more of our past episodes, you can head over to myweirdprompts.com. We have the full archive there, including an RSS feed if you want to subscribe that way. And if you are on Telegram, you can search for My Weird Prompts to get a notification every time we drop a new episode.
We have over 1,300 episodes in the archive now, covering everything from aviation diplomacy in episode 669 to the freelancer's dilemma in episode 448. There is a lot to explore.
And a quick thank you to Daniel for sending in this prompt. It gave us a lot to think about this week. It is always interesting to look at the world through a different lens, even if that lens is a luxury lounge window.
Well, this has been My Weird Prompts. I am Corn.
And I am Herman Poppleberry. Thanks for listening, everyone. We will see you in the next one.
Until next time, stay curious and keep looking for those invisible structures.
Take care.
Oh, goodbye.
Bye.
I wonder if we could ever get a tour of that place, Herman. Just for research purposes, of course.
I think we would have to sell a lot more ads to afford the entrance fee, Corn. Or maybe we need to become heads of state.
I think the ads are more likely.
True. Maybe we will stick to the King David Lounge for now.
If we are lucky.
All right, let's head out.
Sounds good.
Signing off.
See ya.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts.